Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sean Rohde. I'm the Conference Tech Chair, and I'm also the Editor-in-Chief of SOAWorld Journal. We're here today to do a discussion around SOA and web technologies with a few distinguished members of our panel. I'm going to start left to right, have them introduce themselves and give their backgrounds, and then we're going to do a brief discussion around many of the topics that are of interest about SOA, starting with what it is and then devolving into other topics. At the end, we're going to reserve about 5 minutes or so for your questions. And if you have something that's really burning that you just have to get off your chest, raise your hand and we'll try to get it in as we go. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to start left to right.
Hi, my name is Asanka Pereira. I'm an architect and product manager for the WSO2 ESB. We are from a company called WSO2, which was set up in August 2005. It's an open source middleware company focusing mainly on web services middleware.
I'm David Mavashev. I'm CEO of Nastel Technologies. Our company is focused on application performance monitoring, specifically related to the SOA infrastructure that's based on the ESB, and basically ability to pinpoint very quickly problems and reduce mean time for problem resolution. The company has been in the business for a while already. We've been like 12 years in business. Started from the WebSphere management and moved into the ESB management environment.
My name is Kyle Gabhart. I'm a recovering software engineer. Currently serving as the SOA technology lead for WebAge Solutions. They're a premier education and mentoring firm that focuses on emerging technologies and in particular has an interest in SOA, web services, XML, and Web 2.0.
And I'm Fred Holohan. I'm co-founder and chairman of Active Endpoints. We're the leading independent providers of Beeple-based technologies. Beeple has gotten a lot of play at this conference. But essentially, we provide tools and server solutions, both in open source and commercial formats, for doing SOA orchestration.
All right, now that we've got the intros out of the way, I'm going to toss out the first question. We're going to just go down the row for the first part. What do you think is the definition of SOA?
I think it's mostly about using well-defined interactions between different distributed systems and mostly moving away from proprietary formats into open standards and open formats such as XML and HTTP and SOAP. And when integrating different systems, it does not really matter what's the technology or platform you're running on. It may be legacy or it may be a .NET or different application platform. What matters more is the external interface that each of these components are presenting and how you can integrate the different services offered on these platforms and how you can combine and compose services using these basic services again into more advanced services.
David, what's your opinion on this?
SOA is an old concept. It's not a new concept, and the companies in the past tried to implement internally in their companies different types of service-oriented architecture-based applications. Now, getting away from this 7-layer OSI approach of layering all the different types of stack of the software. So basically, what we're trying to do is mimic the actual interaction which is in the human society, translating that to the software business, where everything becomes service, and including the management services, where you can actually identify potential bottlenecks and provide management services to different types of either business or application services. Now, in terms of the definition specifically for SOA, and what's happening is that it's coming more to standards. Okay, so there are some. The fact it's still in early stages, but the standards actually define the way that SOA is being defined by companies that embrace it.
Okay, Kyle. Got an opinion?
Sure. I see it really as an alignment between the business and the technology sides of the house. It's a paradigm as much as it is a particular technology infrastructure. Certainly the standards are a piece of it. Certainly some of the key infrastructure components like registries, repositories, service buses, and that sort of thing are a part of it. But it really is more about, I think, the alignment between business and technology such that the business community sees technology as a strategic business partner who's involved at the table in moving the business forward rather than simply a cost of doing business. And likewise, the technology side of the world is providing visibility into what the real enterprise capabilities are that are provided and how they can help to meet business needs.
So I would agree with Kyle. I think SOA is all about gaining agility, and the way that organizations gain agility is by aligning information with the organization and what the organization's all about. So at the most basic level, SOA involves creating services with standard interfaces on them, whether those services come from new components that are developed through Java or .NET, whether those services are provided by application vendors, or whether they represent abstractions in front of legacy systems. At its most basic level, SOA is about those services that happen at a fairly fine-grained level, and then those services get assembled or combined into larger-grained components which are really intended to be aligned with a specific organizational function. And I think if you can achieve that, then you solve one set of problems and create the next set of challenges as you go. So how do you govern, how do you secure, and so forth. But we're sort of on a path, an adoption path for some parts of SOA right now, and I think it's going to be a very interesting journey for all of us.
Okay, so we heard a couple different things. We heard about technologies, we heard about process, we heard about standards, we heard about bringing the business together, and about tools. If we were to try to define, we're going to start with open questions now. If we're trying to define what's the bare minimum an organization needs for SOA, what would your answer be? Would it just be, a web services stack where I can do WSDL, XML, SOAP, and possibly UDDI, or is it more than that, and why?
I think it depends on where you are in the learning, experimentation, confidence building, and adoption process. If you're right at the beginning of the journey, you really are all about creating services. And so you either need to acquire those services or service interfaces from someone, or you need enabling technology that helps you create those things. Once you've sort of got a bedrock of services in place, then the next set of challenges have to do with how you can assemble them into higher level components. And so then you're into things like Beeple technologies and so forth, orchestration stuff. And then you're starting to get into the challenges of how do you create secure frameworks, how do you scale the kinds of work that you're doing. So having service contracts that exist in between the individual services that can be honored so that you know that the larger grain thing you're developing can honor a quality of service commitment that you make to a customer, for example. And then there is the whole sort of governance framework that wraps around that stuff that allows the non-technical people in the organization to really get involved and sort of button down what the information asset is capable of doing.
Anybody else? Let me take that a little bit further, though. There was something David said that struck my mind. Getting away from the OSI model. But as I look at SOA, we can almost build up our own layered model of services and components. So at the base, we probably have things like, the hardware and software, and there's services that go along with that, infrastructure services like capacity on demand. Then there are shared business services like security, authorization, auditing, and logging. Then you have next layer, which is the shared technology or specific services that a company has developed, and then on the business process, where you're actually building the business process. And then, as we've talked about in many of the sessions in this conference, the whole rich internet application that's going to be the front end to the human interaction with SOA. And we don't always have a human interaction, but a lot of times we do. So do you think there's a need for a standard model around that where we start to classify services into different layers, or do you think we're better off mixing and matching?
I think the question of mixing and matching, I don't think it depends on us in this stage, because the fact is, I think companies spend millions and hundreds of millions of dollars in the prior EI, enterprise application infrastructure, okay, or prior legacy systems. And therefore, they will be existing and coexisting with new approach. Now, and in a new approach, you will always have the different companies approaching from different directions. And they will be providing different types of, let's say, communication services. Communication could be message-based communication services or RPC communication services. So basically, there will be standards, but I don't believe there will be only one standard, because we as humans can never agree on one language. Although United States, for example, in English, spread over all over the world, but still, maybe we'll come to that specific place sometimes with SOA.
Sean, I think what there may be an appetite for is more of a reference model in terms of those layering. Not to say that there's standards per se that indicate this is the way that you need to layer a solution in order for it to be acceptable, but something akin to the OASIS reference model, right, that gives us a framework, it gives us a sense of context and a shared terminology so that as we talk about these fine-grained services, the composite services, the orchestrations, and those sorts of things, that we can begin to do so through a common lexicon, through a common set of patterns, and really sort of move the enterprise forward in more of a consistent way across different industries.
Okay. Something that came to my mind as we were speaking again is we're not talking about a green field in most cases. Most of the enterprises that we go into are not startups that have venture capital funding and no infrastructure. In many cases, they've had 40, 50 years of IT infrastructure to survive and undo. The mainframe is not dead. It's not going to die. So as we look at the projects that we have to do to build an SOA in an enterprise like that, we obviously know we're not going to do it all in one big bang. But what are the biggest challenges around moving an enterprise to an SOA foundation? Ash, anybody?
I think one of the key items would be how you would expose your existing assets based on legacy applications or mainframe-based systems. So one of the things which is going to come useful is if you are using an enterprise service bus to expose your existing assets or existing applications as standard services or offered over the enterprise service bus, so that you can build and compose high-level applications or services, still reusing some of the assets that you already have and still tapping into your core business applications which are still on the mainframes, as well as expose them as standard SOAP interfaces to your partners, so that you can communicate and integrate between their systems as well as your systems in your enterprise.
I think that actually the challenges sort of break down into three areas. One is methodology. What's the order and sequence in which you carry the existing asset base forward? The second is knowledge. How do you bring your people forward? And the third is access. So I've got a very important host-based CICS transaction that runs my order processing business. That transaction was built with the contemplation that it was going to be basically driven by a green screen terminal that would be operated by someone within my company. When you put a service interface in front of that and make that transaction available to the outside world, it brings into question issues of security, who actually should have access to that transaction, and quality of service. If I'm building a new customer service portal and I'm making information available to my customers globally, and part of my business contract with those customers is 24/7 by 365 availability, and that CICS system goes down for maintenance at 3 o'clock every morning Eastern Standard Time, then I have to know at the point of construction, of application construction, that that transaction is not going to be able to honor the quality of service commitments that I make to my customers. That's very challenging stuff. And it does cut to how you do things like incorporate governance and quality of service standards into the development process, the design and assembly process. You don't want to wait until 2 days after you deploy that application to find out that you're not able to honor that quality of service contract.
That's a good example. Let's explore that a little bit. So you have what we have are online, offline issues. Should the design of an SOA take that into account? I mean, is it something that always should happen? So should the message bus be resilient enough to hold the messages until that application is online? How do we make those kind of decisions? What are the guidelines in that particular case?
I think in these cases you still need the same issues of the high availability, high reliability of those services, and the ability to meet the SLAs will still be a challenge as it is right now. So it's going to move into SOA situation. The fact of the matter is those transactions have to be completed even though that particular service is not available. So the management of the infrastructure, SOA infrastructure, that will provide you availability of, or at least ability to go to a different service, as we do, for example, today in the human society. When this particular service is not available, we can actually find out that particular road is blocked. We can choose another road and go to different communication protocol to get to a specific service. So for us is to be able to provide quality of service to our customers, and regardless of whether that specific service is available or not available, an ability to identify whether there's another way to get to a service through a different means. So that's a challenge to be able to meet from a performance perspective, from a transactional perspective.
So one of the things I take out of that too is, as we think about this, part of this conversation revolves on whether things, transactions, processes, services are synchronous or asynchronous, and what type of model we're using. So do you have an opinion? I mean, some folks, I've noticed that we start out with synchronous as we develop things because it's simpler and easy to understand that model, and some folks never progress past that. But does the synchronous offer us additional advantages that we should pursue, or is it just yet another tool there that we can do when we need to?
I think you've got to be able to accommodate both of those transaction models. I mean, they're both important parts of your business, right? You can do you have the ability to do a different style of transaction if you're doing things synchronously. Those types of transactions tend to be shorter lived, so you can lock down the resources that service those transactions confidently. With longer running transactions, it's more challenging to do something that's atomic in nature, because you often can't lock down resources for long enough periods of time. And in some cases, you don't even have control over what those information assets are. So you have to take a different approach to transaction management in that world. You have to think more in terms of compensation as a transaction model.
So we asked the question earlier, what are the essentials of SOA? So we started to have this conversation. Let me just catch up where we are now. We've talked about being able to make and deploy services inside and outside of a company. We've talked about the need to secure services. We've talked about the need to set up transaction boundaries to be able to do both asynchronous and synchronous communications. We've talked about the need to build composite services. So we're starting to get a good feel of what an SOA actually encompasses. What about data? I mean, when you think about corporations, the biggest source of information in a corporation is stored in its legacy databases. Should we break that out? What's the role of data in an SOA?
I would say that in this case, it's still providing data services or storage type of services. So in the SOA environment, there will be another service that will be from the legacy systems, which will be wrapped around and comply with the SOA protocols and be able to be invoked whenever it's needed and provide data services, as, for example, we discussed whether it's asynchronous communication services or synchronous communication services.
You know, also, I've found in working with clients that the role of data management has expanded in a service-oriented context, because not only do you need to maintain the underlying data stores, but now you've got these metadata relationships to handle. And you also have data that's being managed at other levels of composition. So you've got data that's being exchanged at a business at sort of a domain level that goes beyond any of the fine-grained, low-level ideas where you know that it's stored in this database or that database, that this is CRM data, and then we have our ERP data, and you have the silos that traditionally emerge within a data environment, but then as you progress up into more of these aggregate services, more of these business level services, you have to think in terms of the domain, in terms of the business model, and eventually even moving to data representation at the orchestration level and begin to manage those data models there. And so we've been working with architects to actually move beyond just diagramming and modeling data at the very low level, but to look from a business perspective at all the ways in which data is manifested and model and represent and manage it there.
I think there are issues of structured and unstructured data as well. Structured data has a very long and storied history of being professionally managed. Unstructured data, which is often the tastiest stuff to make available through a composite type of application, is often not managed with the same level of rigor and formality that the structured stuff is. And so I think that to the degree that organizations are endeavoring to make unstructured information more available through SOA-style applications, there's also going to be a need to become a little bit more formal in how that information is managed.
And that becomes even more poignant with mashups and what people are doing in Web 2.0 and beginning to pull data together from a user perspective without going through the traditional hoops.
That's a very good point.
Yeah.
Right, so if we started to look at that from the context of we're talking about data services, we're not really talking about database connections or SQL queries anymore. We're talking about asking for a complex business relationship, a business document or concept, like a single view of the customer. Or we're talking about a federated feed of information that, say, it's a stock ticker and it's a stock you own, not just your position in it, but the up-to-the-minute stock price and therefore the value of your portfolio. Do we need to include content or document management then as key facets of an SOA? Are they nice to haves or are they crucial?
I'm not very familiar with that question, so I'm going to pass
No
that.
worries about that. Anybody else?
I would say it is crucial. See, all this, whatever we have here is basically all the SOA concept and is basically to serve the businesses. Okay, so at the end, companies don't want to spend monies on IT as long as it supports their business and reduces their cost. That's where you actually will reap off the benefits from SOA in the future. So the fact of the matter is, for any business process to communicate and orchestrate those business processes, you need all the necessary information, all the necessary services to make those business services highly available and highly reliable. Okay? And people will have to have access to different types of documents to be provided as a service to them, okay, at the time when they need them to be able to deal with problems on the timely manner. Okay? So I would say that clearly there's a need for that.
I think it really depends on the business in question. So there are certain businesses that are more or less document-driven, where it becomes crucial that, say, a purchase order or that a bill of materials is a key part of their supply chain. And that would be an area where I would say that document management would be essential as a part of a service-oriented strategy. There's other business models that are more liquid than that, and the management of documents and content at that level isn't really a core part of their business and wouldn't be a key part of their SOA strategy. I mean, it's tempting to say that a little bit of SOA is good, so more SOA must be better. I should service-orient everything. But the reality is that it's important to identify, let's say, the 20% of your business where you can get the 80% return and focus on service-orienting that. And if you're not, by and large, a document content-driven organization, you're not going to find a tremendous amount of value out of service-orienting that part of your business.
But at the same time, we're going to, based on the discussions, we're transforming the notion of what is data and what is content. What's a document to you may not even be a document to me. So what we're going to see coming down the way, I think, is this whole transformation of the data area, where we talked, you almost hit on it, and I'm going to bring it back. We're talking about storage, whether it's in a database or a flat file, a content management system. It's stored somewhere on a machine. It could be in a SAN, could be even offline if we have to do archival storage. The whole concept of what does the database do versus what does the storage do is changing. And we're going to see that in the service. We've got probably time to do one more of our questions, and then we're going to start with the audience. So I wanted to set a scenario. Let's say you're a large company. You've got 20,000 Kix transactions in a mainframe. You've got some services all over the place, and you take orders on the web. And to date, you have not done anything about SOA. What's the one thing or the first thing that you should do?
Attend SOAWorld.
Give the man a cigar. And after you've been enlightened by us, what should you go back to the company and do?
You know, I think that it comes down to identifying, first of all, who the champions are going to be, because that's really going to be the key driver. If you've never done anything in the space, it's about finding a couple of folks, a handful of people, maybe from your EA team, maybe from the CIO department, who really can get a hold of this, can understand what it provides and what the potential is for your organization, because it is so unique for each business. And once they understand that, doing whatever kind of research, investigation, pilot type of programs they need to do, then they can become the evangelists to move forward and identify where in the business, what divisions, what lines of business, what products and services it makes sense to move forward and look at the service orientation side of things.
I would try to find one project that seems to be well suited toward getting your toes in the water with a SOA type of architecture. Maybe one that would involve the service enablement and orchestration of a couple of different information assets, not something too ambitious, but something that will give the team the ability to sort of take a digestible set of things to learn, perhaps look for a good consulting and mentoring partner, and use that project as the first step in learning. If you do that, the chances are much higher that you're actually going to succeed with the project, which at the end of the day is the objective, whether you're doing it with a SOA flavor or not. But the chances are also much better that in that success, you'll gain experience and confidence and a beginning of a methodology for how you can expand that footprint into other projects.
You know, I think the pilot project is a key piece to it. One thing I'd underscore is that it seems like a lot of times organizations, in looking for low-hanging fruit and looking for something that's a small enough scope that they're not going to crush the company in doing it, is that they don't take enough risk and they end up having something that doesn't have much of an ROI. And so they had a successful SOA implementation, but it didn't do anything. And so people look at that and they say, okay, great, it didn't fail, but I'm not buying in that this is really going to transform the organization. I don't see that this is going to be something that's going to move us forward and make us more agile. So while choosing something with the appropriate scope, I think at the same time it's key to make sure that this is something that actually will matter to the enterprise and provide some tangible value. And then, like you say, serve as that platform to move forward with more service orientation and incorporate lessons learned and develop that methodology you talked about.
So it won't turn into a SOA what?
Yeah. We almost made it the whole session without that.
Sorry.
So close.
David, I think
So
you
what are you
were
gonna do?
primed to say something, so why don't you?
Yeah, one of the things I would say is that obviously there are, before moving into the implementation of that specific environment to SOA, there have to be identified what the actual problems are with that specific issue, moving that application to SOA. One of the things is usually those applications are not isolated applications. There are some issues associated with, for example, changing application, changing the data structure, and and then which in return affects other applications that communicate with each other. So the fact is that they have to identify how they can wrap around and use the right ESB model, for example, choose for them the right ESB model, where the business orchestration data transformations can occur, where they can actually reduce the cost. Everything has to be driven by the cost reduction, okay? I understand people can take challenging approaches and create different types of pilots that can cost them millions and millions of dollars, and at the end increase the total maintenance. The fact of the matter is that it has to be approached from the cost reduction perspective and looking into the integration with their overall application, have a strategy where they're going to do that. And they can take initially a pilot specifically. And then that will reduce their total cost of ownership of that specific application. And the reason would be is if we change any data, as I mentioned, data structure, I don't have to actually change the clients because I would do all this stuff on the ESB level. Now, I would also think about how do I make sure that during that implementation, I have highly available, highly reliable infrastructure that supports this specific service that I will wrap around and provide services to other applications. So clearly there has to be architectural approach here, not just a knee-jerk approach where you can actually try to spend money and at the end get high cost.
I agree that we need to find the right proof of concept or a pilot project to start on, and it might be useful to kind of like do a analysis of all the assets that you already have in your enterprise, and then kind of like create a scenario to pick out the pilot project so that some of the services that you are going to create or expose during that project can be used in subsequent exercises again, so as to build confidence in going to SOA architecture, as well as getting benefits to your enterprise much sooner. And also one of the easiest things would be to look into areas where you need to integrate with partner systems. So if you're going to talk over the internet to a different partner, and if your applications are mostly legacy applications, you might want to use SOAP and the standard protocols to integrate the different applications. And it might be a good chance to try out SOA implementation and see what these open standards and a service-oriented architecture can be helpful in the enterprise.
I think I just want to add here, in terms of choosing specific protocols, I think the protocols will be particularly covered by the services that will be invoked as per needed basis. So I'm not sure what the companies will be using specifically SOAP protocol, message queuing protocol, as we discussed in the past, or RPC protocols. That has to be transparent to the actual, from the service bus perspective. It doesn't make any difference. That's the way I see it.
I should have asked this question first. All right, so we've heard some things about what SOA is, how to build it, how to take your first steps in SOA. Why don't I open the floor up to questions? If you have a question, please stand up and speak up. And I'll point to whoever stands up first.
Not all at once.
I guess we've amazed
question.
them.
Okay, I have two questions. The first question is that one of the gentlemen mentioned that you want to get away from the some layer model, the layered model. That was the gentleman, the white shirt.
David Mavish.
Now, so what you're implying that you would like to get away from layers, where each layer depends on the other layer. I would like to clarify that. Okay, the other. Okay, why? Okay, what do you mean by that? And the second question is on the data. SOA or not SOA, a business process might involve many business units in one company, many companies, and each one will have a different database schema, okay? And there are different data models, so you're dealing with heterogeneous data models, okay? SOA or not SOA, that's a key issue, okay? So those are the two questions.
I think that from what I meant by OSI model, I think when you asked, there's different layers on the stack there, which is actually talks about networking, I think operating system, databases, etc. Goes to data up to application layer. Now in the SOA type of environment, all these become more of a service. There will not be any, for example, at least that's the attempt, is not to have any communication layer or middleware layer, but more of the more of a service that will provide you communication. For example, you today, can move, for example, taking either bus service to move somewhere, or can take train, or can take a plane. So it's different types of services provided to you. That's the way it's going to be provided in the SOA type of environment. Now, from the data modeling perspective, and you mentioned, I think, the changing some data definitions, right? That's what you mentioned? Right, so what's happening is, absolutely, but the fact is, the ESB will make it transparent, so you may actually change any of your data models. But I'm saying is the message brokers, for example, companies like IBM have WebSphere Business Integration Suite, or TIBCO has that, or some web methods. All those companies provide data transformation engine where you don't have to know the actual remote systems or applications data model. The only thing you know is your model, and you can request that data as a service now, and it doesn't matter whether it's actually a database, as mentioned here, or it's a file or any other storage service. So that will make your life easier. That's the way
All right, we've got time for only a couple more questions, so this gentleman over here.
It's a question over here first, sir.
All right, very good.
Thank you. We talked about SOA, and I'd like to understand more from your perspective the implication of the infrastructure. We talk about virtualization and what SOA is driven and driving this virtualization. What about the implication within the infrastructure? What about the networks, the storage, everything underlying, and what about the IT operation? Is this going to be transparent, or also it's going to require a lot of changes?
Well, I myself see with my clients that I see the infrastructure as a set of services that are going to be provided to the enterprise. So the virtualization of machines, of services, of applications, or business processes is just yet another layer. Capacity on demand will allow you to scale your enterprise accordingly, to add capacity, to reroute capacity, to deal with issues of outages and downtime. It's not a magic bullet. You can't just do that to a mainframe. You can't get a tenth of a mainframe at the moment. But it will happen where you'll be able to scale your enterprise to the things that need to be done. And but in an overall service-oriented architecture, I think that is just one set of services. They're the lower-level services, the infrastructure or support services that are going to be important and scalable. All right? So you might find your LDAP servers running slow, so you scale it to a second one. All right? So there's a quality of service aspect that will be monitored and managed by management software, and then there's the actual allocation of the slices of time and everything else.
I think virtualization of business information will ultimately evolve to be all about eventing and notification. You have different infrastructures for monitoring and managing what happens inside of business applications that in today's world, in today's composite application infrastructure, can only operate by doing things like extracting business payloads from the wire protocols. I think that as SOA grows up, what we will find is that we'll have better ways as a community of tagging the key business events that are happening inside of a composite application, and having the composite infrastructure deliver very high fidelity business information to some type of reporting endpoint, like a systems management console or an activity monitor or a business intelligence environment or what have you. So I think that this is an area of very significant growth and opportunity within the sort of SOA vendor ecosystem, and I think you'll see a lot of growth there.
All right, so we only have time for just the one more question. We are running out of time. So, sir, you have the mic.
Yeah, I'd like to return to the data modeling issue. My question is, the canonical model which you have somewhere in the middle of your enterprise service bus that you map to and you map from, how important is it to have a complete generalized model that can handle anything in the world, and where does that fit in the adoption the SOA adoption process?
Let me say one thing. I've been in consulting for 15 years, and I've seen many, many enterprise data models, and they all have one thing in common. They never are complete.
Right.
I agree.
All right.
Yeah, and so whether you're using an ESB or a different approach, that canonic model, and I agree with the notion that you need to have a starting point for what represents the truth in your data model, right? But that canonic model is a living, breathing thing, and so that's thing number one to sort of get your minds wrapped around. Another thing is that Outside of that canonic model, it's a very messy world. So from a knowledge and methodological perspective, you are going to be mapping from many different types of data models, exogenous data models, into that canonical model, and from that canonical model outward. And you just have got to get used to the fact that if you're dealing with things that are very heterogeneous in nature, that you're going to have to take on that work and look for great tools and great methods for accomplishing that in the most efficient way.
All right, so I would love to go on, but we do have to let the next presentation get on the stage. So thank you very much. This has been the SOA Power Panel. Good night.
Thank you.